Have you ever faced an obstacle that you had no idea how to handle? Helen Keller's life was a battle from beginning to end, filled with constant obstacles that she had the will and determination and the support behind her to face. Most people do not know the full story of Helen Keller. The story of her life too often ends at the beginning. This is why I'm giving my speech on her today, so that her life's legacy will not end at 9 years old. Helen was born June 27, 1880, into a poor family in Tuscumbia, Alabama. She was born healthy and very intelligent. At 6 months old, she was already starting to talk. But by 1882, that all changed. She became very sick with scarlet fever or meningitis. It is not known quite for sure what it was. But in the book, Helen Keller, Courage in the Darkness, they say it was recorded that Helen had severe congestion of the brain and the stomach. Her family thought she was going to die. According to the census of 1910, roughly 30% of children were affected by scarlet fever or meningitis in the United States. Today, these are cured with immunizations such as penicillin. Helen contracted blindness and deafness from whichever sickness it was. She became extremely frustrated and would throw tantrums when she couldn't get her way. She was very spoiled and very confused. And her parents did not know what to do about this until they heard about Laura Bridgman. Laura Bridgman had scarlet fever when she was very young and was left only with her sense of touch. But she was able to be taught to communicate. And her parents thought that if they could do something like people had done for Laura, that they could help Helen too. This led them to being referred to the Perkins Institution, where Michael Anagnos, the school director, sent Anne Sullivan to live with them. Anne Sullivan also had eye problems, like she had trachoma, which were bumps under her eyes that caused blurry vision. But she also had the drive to learn and made her very much like Helen. Anne knew as soon as she arrived that this was going to be a very difficult process to teach Helen. She started by teaching Helen the manual alphabet by spelling into Helen's hands. Helen did not understand though, and she only knew that she would be rewarded if she made the same motions back to Anne. Anne knew that she was very smart, but the key to teaching Helen was to discipline her without breaking her spirit. She decided to request for isolation, and she asked Helen's parents if they could live in a different environment. So they were sent to live at the cottage, which was across from the farm. Being in a new environment without being spoiled by her parents, Helen was able to be taught very easily. She learned many words and was able to read and type Braille. Already becoming very famous, Helen was receiving donations from all over. She would raise money to help people in need that had disabilities like her, even at a very young age. Soon enough, they also used this money to pay for education. They decided to travel to the Perkins Institution, where she studied French along with English and other communication skills. She was happy to have these tools, but she still felt limited and isolated from other people. She wanted to learn to speak like the other kids. Anne wasn't so sure about this, but she found Sarah Fuller, who was a principal at another school, and Sarah attempted to teach Helen. But Helen could not properly make sounds, and she did not know how to. Although she did learn how to speak English, she could never be fully understood. Although she couldn't be fully understood, Helen also learned lip reading from Sarah Fuller, where she would use her hand to place on a person's face and throat to feel the vibrations of the sounds they were making, and she could decipher the words that way. After the Perkins Institute, they moved on to continue her education at the Wright Humiston School for the Deaf. Eventually, she ended up at Cambridge School, which was the best school for girls in New York at the time. They were very dependent on benefactors because Helen came from a very poor family and they still had very little. And she wanted to continue working toward working towards a good education. She wanted to go to Radcliffe School, which was a very prestigious school at the time, taught by Harvard professors. In 1900, Helen passed the entrance exams and became the first deaf and blind college student in the country. Anne attended all of Helen's classes and would read to her studies and notes. In their spare time, they would play chess together, and Helen would read about Swedenborgianism, which was a form of Christianity. Helen was very passionate about writing. In 1903, she wrote The Story of My Life, which was her autobiography. And this was one of her very first published works. She received her bachelor's from Radcliffe, along with, throughout her life, 6 or 7 other honorary degrees from universities around the world. Today, according to the American Foundation for the Blind, the Helen Keller archives contain over 475 speeches and essays that she wrote on topics such as faith, blindness prevention, birth control, the rise of fascism in Europe, and atomic energy. She was able to typewrite all of these things she wanted to communicate, and therefore able to pass on her beliefs to thousands of people at the time all around the world. Because of her outspokenness, though, she was starting to receive less money from her previous benefactors. But other people began to support her that she had never met before, very important people from around the world. Helen was said to be a pacifist, a devoted socialist, and an advocate for women's rights. She was a member of the American Civil Liberties Union and a member of the AFB, which she joined in 1921. When she joined the American Foundation for the Blind, she was able to travel all across the world like she had wanted to, in order to advocate for others with disabilities like her. This opened the doors for many people who had similar problems to her. She was very against the war and wanted to help people in countries at war who had vision loss. She helped form the Blind War Relief Fund, now called Helen Keller International. In 1946, Helen began her first of 7 trips, traveling internationally like she'd wanted. In the 35 countries she visited, she spoke on her beliefs and how to help those who were blind, and she met world leaders and very many important people along the way. 1955, Helen went on her longest trip. It was quoted as a 40,000-mile, 5-month-long tour across Asia. This was when she was 75 years old. Helen continued to spread encouragement, and she passed away in 1968. The story does not end after jumping the first hurdle. After each obstacle, one has to keep moving forward. She did not let her disabilities hold her back. Instead, she used her situation to express her beliefs and help people all over the world. Whether or not you agree with Keller's political views, it is only right to give her credit that she had views. If you worked as hard as Keller and her companions did to make it to their positions, would you want your legacy to end at 9 years old?